Hello, Professor Didi here today, talking to you about the concept of imperialism. It's one of those things in international relations that sometimes doesn't get talked about a lot because a lot of the countries involved in imperialism are the global north countries that took advantage of the global south countries in a variety of awful ways. Congratulations, gave them their independence, and then it was like they didn't give them any money for the natural resources they looted out of these countries they gave them independence from. Imperialism is the process of extending a nation's authority over a people and a territory, often creating a political and economic hegemon among other nations. Empires represent the extension of one's people and control over another, the opportunity to basically take goods from a country without concern for cost or the local people, and then resell them and make them into some wonderful stuff later. Think about the Americans and the British. We created all these products like tobacco, lumber, and then the British took the products and made them into finished materials. The division of power and wealth between the global north and global south poses a lot of moral and ethical issues. The underdeveloped south, in many ways, 80% of the world's population is there. 20% of the world's population is the wealth of the global north. The global north were the wealthy countries of the first world. The global south, the less wealthy countries of the south. The start of imperialism started with European political power and expansion and political dominance that was built on the search for trade routes, to seek more goods and more materials, trade routes that went to Asia. Remember, Columbus was lost. He was trying to get to India when he allegedly discovered America. The expectation of this trade was going to create more political power among the wealthy nations of Europe. At one of the most fundamental distinctions among European empires was that some emphasized territorial conquest, whereas others concentrated on trade routes. Britain, France, Portugal, all looked at imperialism in a variety of different ways. Starting in the 15th century, Spain, the Dutch, England, France, Portugal used their military power to conquer these territories for commercial gain and political power. The goals of mercantilism, European governments trying to maintain a favorable balance of trade. They were seeking power through all these new products that they were going to get and use on the commercial market. Think about this aspect. The decline of a lot of this started with laissez-faire economics and Adam Smith. In time, as the world became a smaller place, imperialism changed in a lot of different ways as far as taking advantage of poorer nations. Today, it's not necessarily trade. It's being able to take advantage of poorer nations using call centers and a variety of other things. The first Trans-Oceanic Empires were Spain and Portugal. They sought new conquest throughout the world. They focused on South America and what their riches held there. In Brazil, Portugal grew sugarcane on the plantations. African slaves were imported to compensate for the lack of labor. Brazil gained independence with very little conflict, but Portuguese colonies in Africa would often have to wait till the 70s, the 1970s, after decades of civil war and turmoil. The Dutch Empire began with the foundation of the Dutch East India Company in 1602, and concentrated on strategic trade ports, coastal areas. We often think of the Dutch Empire, we don't think about India. We think about, the Dutch came to America and did stuff in New York City and places like that. Other countries, the French created an empire in their regions of the world, creating an empire controlling parts of the country of Canada, areas of Quebec. France, remember, owned part of America. The Louisiana Purchase was done by purchasing property from France. That was part of the French Empire. The British Empire we're most familiar with when we think of the Americas and the colonies. But they also had empires in India, the Caribbean, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. To prevent a repeat of the American Revolution, the British gave many of those areas more self-government. On the eve of World War I, one of the most famous expressions was that the sun never set on the British Empire for the fact that it was so large. World War I and the financial toll of World War II forced the British to basically give up large parts of their empire. They really fought to the end before they finally realized they had to give India their independence in 1947. The United States and Russia military expansion was very different. America never really sought a lot of colonial empires, whereas the Russians looked to expand to Siberia and the Baltics. And many of their empire building was after the Russian Revolution, controlling Eastern Europe for more political reasons than economic reasons. The United States expansion started in the 1800s, obtaining Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, and Hawaii, making it a political power in the Pacific. Then you also have the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim area of Turkey, that was a major force in world politics for 500 years to the end of World War I. At its peak, the Ottoman Empire controlled parts of Turkey, Greece, the Balkans, the Middle East, parts of Russia, and even parts of the Ukraine. That was a large empire that collapsed when they took the wrong side in World War I. But imperialism started to decline because of pressure from peoples subjected to the imperial controls of these powers. It became a political taboo to be part of imperialism. At times, people started to call in the 20th century for self-determination and decolonialization. Give people an opportunity to pick the type of government they want. Get rid of the colonial aspects. Let people govern themselves. Many ethnic conflicts in the global south have colonial roots, since imperial powers drew the borders with very little regard for the identities of people. Look at a map of Africa and notice that it was drawn with a ruler in a large part. Straight lines designed to divide tribal and communities to create more political power for the colonial powers. Colonialism became a major aspect with settler and elite colonialism going on in parts of Europe and in parts of the whole world as far as how to colonialize all these areas. When we think about the economic consequences of imperialism, countries went into these places. The British came into the United States. They took a lot of tobacco, made cigarettes out of it, but it left a lot of these colonial countries poorer, not better off as far as things. In general, the imperialistic countries sucked the raw materials and goods out of the countries they ruled and sent them back to the countries as finished goods. Cultural and ideology also impact colonialism. In the United States, the legacy of the Anglo-Saxon traditions of rule of law, private property, individual rights have never been seriously questioned. Colonialism created fragmentation that saw European strategy of divide and conquer that made post-colonial political cohesion and stability difficult to achieve. Colonialism was not necessarily a good thing. It did build up some countries, but it did not leave these people politically independent. And often, many countries finally got their independence, not necessarily through battle, but through basically politically it became taboo, and they had gotten enough raw materials out of the country where they were happy. There were many colonial conflicts created by the desire of indigenous peoples to free themselves of colonial domination. If you want to think about colonialism in this other aspect, the country of India is a perfect example of this. Many countries went into India. The British stayed. They controlled India. Gandhi sought to free his people. They wanted freedom. They wanted independence. But the British didn't want to give up the raw material and the political power that became associated with controlling India. And that created a lot of problems there.